build an API and you have some data. This data obviously has to be stored somewhere, so you're going to store it within an SQL database. Now, to communicate with this SQL database, there are many ways of doing it, and here they are. You can either use an ORM, a query builder, or you can simply write raw SQL. And I'm going to go through these three different methods of interacting with your database within an API setting and seeing which one would work best for you. All right. Now, these code samples that you see are assuming that you have a Node.js environment, but the overall concepts are applicable to any backend server-side language or framework, right? So that includes Java, Python with Django, right? And many other languages like Ruby on Rails. Okay, so let's go and first learn what ORM is. Okay, and this, you can think of it as the highest level of abstraction. And if you didn't know, abstraction simply means taking away a specific complexity or logic and replacing it with simpler logic. All right, in this case, we're taking away all of our database communication. That includes connecting to the database, the actual queries like SQL queries themselves. They're all abstracted away, and you get simple commands that you can just use, right? And we can see that with the Prisma ORM. All right, it's just a type of ORM that is available within a Node.js environment. And you can see within here, we just need a call on post. We just need to call the find many function. All right, so we just need to call this logic here and then give our city, and that's it. We're done, right? It's very, very simple to get started. Right, we do not work with the SQL at all. We do not work with any connection pooling. None of these concepts, we don't need to know them, right? Because the ORM takes all of that logic for us, okay? But this comes at a huge cost, and that cost is performance, all right? Prisma is very, very slow, and that's because it's handling all of this logic for us, okay? So essentially, an ORM, or actually it's called an object relational mapping, will take away all of the complexity that comes with connecting and communicating with an SQL database, but it will add a lot of performance issues. So that is the issue with an ORM and why people use an ORM, all right? And if you didn't know, the ORM just works using the object-oriented programming principles, and you can actually see that within a API. So here I have an API. This is my Trashify project. In this project, I used an ORM, specifically Prisma. And if you see here, this is the exact data code that I copied and pasted. And this Prisma is actually an object, and if I actually go in here, I can prove that's an object through here, right? Because this is a syntax to generate a new object, and you can see that this is actually the class that defines what methods and what attributes go within that specific object. All right, so that is an ORM. Next, we have Query Builder. This is the medium level. All right, this is the medium level of abstraction. All right. And what do I mean by this? Well, with an ORM, you're abstracting all of your database logic, right? You simply have to only use the predefined methods that are, ORM specific, and you're good to go, right? You don't need to deal with any SQL related issues. But within a query builder, you're actually going to be using the query builder's syntax to create a SQL query. Within here, right, you're not actually building a query. You're simply just calling a method which has or is linked to a predefined query. Within a query builder, you're actually going to be constructing the query yourself. Okay? And so as you can see here, we're doing that right here, right? It somewhat looks like SQL, but it's not actually SQL or raw SQL, right? But it has the, you can think of it as the logic or the syntax that is commonly associated with the SQL language. All right. Now, by doing this, you are basically going to be adding more performance, right? So a query builder is usually more performant than an ORM, and that's because you're not abstracting the the queries into a specific function. You're defining those queries yourself, right? All right. Now, by the way, something that I forgot to mention is within an ORM. Okay. So within an ORM, another thing above, ease of use, right, with the abstraction of the SQL, you also have protection, all right? You have security over SQL injections. So SQL injections happen when a malicious user tries to add, SQL or inject SQL into your server-side environment, right? And that is a very, very bad thing, because then they can have access to any data without us having restrictions over it, right? But with an ORM, since you're abstracting your SQL logic into predefined functions, it actually saves you from that, right? Because the user doesn't have access to the raw SQL. Now, there is a way around this by using raw SQL, and that is by parameterizing it, and you can read documentation on that. It's very, very easy. So yeah, you don't necessarily need an ORM for that, and that shouldn't be the only reason why I use an ORM. Mainly, I would only really use an ORM if your data requirements are not that huge or not that complex, so you can afford that performant issue, right? Because again, first of all, you're not gonna have that much control because you're using predefined queries. Second of all, more performance issues. Now with the query builder, you're still getting the SQL injection free security feature, but again, you can do that with raw SQL. You can fix it with raw SQL, but it helps because you're still getting a level of abstraction, right, over your query. So it allows for more customization while still being relatively easy to start up, right? Now with the raw SQL, you are just going to be basically writing SQL commands, right? And here's a little example of that happening. So I'm going to actually just mute this. So if I actually go here, you can see this is a Python version, but it kind of gives you an idea. You're simply writing a raw SQL within a string, and you're just using some sort of third-party library. In this case, they're using SQLite 3, and they're simply going to be executing that raw SQL. Now, this is an okay way to also do it, but the issue with this is that the statements are, as you can see, in a text format, so they can become cumbersome, and you might have a lot of SQL queries, which do not make any sense, right? Because of the fact that there's no type safing, all right? With, for example, with the query builder, right, you have type safing in terms of, because Knex, which is a query builder within Node.js, it actually has specific predefined methods which correlate to a specific query command, right? Like you have select, from, where, right? So this way you are not getting, you're not going to be that error prone because of the fact that you're basically getting this guideline or this template on how to build your SQL queries. With raw SQL, you can literally write anything you want and it will execute it, which will lead to more error-prone code, because if you mess up any single thing within that raw SQL, you're going to have issues, right? So essentially, raw SQL is definitely out of the agenda, and many companies don't even use it as well. And it's simply because of the fact that you're getting such low abstraction, right? Meaning that all the complexity is on you. You have to build the SQL query yourself. You have to connect it to yourself, as you can see with this. And then you also have to execute it through the third-party library, right? But through this, again, as I said, it leads to more errors because you're not getting that type safing feature, as it's not abstracted, right? The libraries that support raw SQL expect you to know how to build SQL queries, but again, that could lead to unsafe code. So that's why I tend to lean to query builders. maybe an ORM depending on like if my project is not that heavy on data, right? Like in terms of like joining tables and more complex queries, then I'll probably use an ORM. But otherwise, I'm using a query builder because again, you're still getting that feeling that you're building the queries, which allows for customization, right? With an ORM, it's predefined SQL queries, so you do not have any control over the queries. But with a query builder, you can make, as you can see over here, I built my own query, and I can add any customization. Like I could change this table, right? I can add another another query over here, like for example maybe like join, right, and I can join to another table, right? I have full control over my specific needs, right? And you're still getting that level of abstraction, so you're still getting that type safing, right? Because it will let you know this different query commands allowed, right? And like in the case of like where it'll also let you know the different parameters that go in, right? In this case it accepts 3, and especially if you're using this with like TypeScript, that's gonna work really perfect. Or if you're using it with type safe languages like Python or Java, it could also work very well. All right, so that's why I really tend to lean to query builders, especially Next. It's a really good one. And then raw SQL, it's very fast, right? Because again, there's no abstraction, right? With this case, they have to go find that predefined query and then run everything and then give the result back to this object through a promise, right? Hence the await. But within a raw SQL, you just run the command like that and you're good to go, right? Because the abstraction, you're doing all the abstraction, right? But that also leads to error-prone code, as I explained earlier. So in my opinion, query builders are the best, and that's why I'm using Next actually within this API. All right, so this is the Scholarly API, and I'm going to use it within here. Currently we are using Prisma, and I only have really the auth, so I'm going to go ahead and change everything to use Next. So I'm really excited to see how this goes. Alright, that's it from me and my little ramping session. So yeah, let me know your opinions. Of course, there's going to be a lot of different ones, and I am, I'm down to hear what you guys think. Maybe what I'm doing is completely wrong, and maybe raw SQL is better. I don't know. But based on what I've been learning over the past, few months, I believe that a query builder is the best way to go. All right. But yeah, again, these are the 3 ways you communicate with a database through your API. All right. And yeah, take care.